because he created the Matrix, which enslaves mankind. But guess what? The Oracle knows better. The Oracle convinces Neo of his ability to rise out of the Matrix. It's Gnosticism. Pleasantville. A description of the perfect place that is too perfect for humanity. Eden. A place that needs to have color and enlightenment brought to it through the exploration of forbidden things like sexuality. Think about it. The more and more and more knowledge that Tobey Maguire brings to the picture, the more sinful things happen in Pleasantville, the more color happens. The more they become real people, the more they become released from the cage that they were in. That is Gnosticism. The Truman Show. Get this. Sophie tries to free Truman from his make-believe world where even the elements in the sun and stars themselves are controlled by a sadistic, power-hungry producer named Christoph. Now think about this. Sophie, Sophia, Truman, the true man, Christoph, of Christ. Think about it. Vanilla Sky, same thing. There's a ton of them. They're all out there, and they're all part of popular culture. Because Gnosticism never went away, because the church wasn't able to extinguish it. Why? Because Gnosticism is syncretic. It's able to creep in, grab what it needs to, alter its appearance, and then look the way that it needs to look. And then, of course, the Da Vinci Code. A return, a triumphant return of the red-headed stepchild of Gnosticism to Christianity. A completely triumphant return. Did you know that National Geographic owns the actual Nag Hammadi text of the Book of Judas? National Geographic owns the Gospel of Judas. The Gospel of Judas is a completely false Gnostic gospel dated only as early back as 200 at most. Okay, now Christ existed when? 30 AD, right? Ish. Okay? And most of the writings, for instance, of the Apostle Paul, written 60 AD. So you have a text that's 150 years later than that that's claiming to be a different type of gospel. It's a Gnostic gospel. It claims that Christ is this emanation that came to free us or whatever, right? You know that it is National Geographic which owns that and was constantly putting it out there that Christianity was originally Gnostic in nature. That Christianity has no real foundation in reality as nothing more as a property of truth, but instead as an experience. That Christ is an experience. And when I say Christ is an experience, why would I say that he's an experience? Because in Gnosticism, matter is evil. So, if Christ is God, if Christ is good, if Christ is the divine, then he can't have a physical form. What do you think the Gnostics believe? The Gnostics believe that Christ was a group hallucination. Now, when we go and we look at literature by the so-called scholars, what is it that they tell us about Christ these days? That Christ was not real. That there was probably a person named Christ, but in actuality, the biblical Christ, not real. They tell us that all these things that people witnessed, thousands of people together, that was probably a group hallucination. Wow, that sounds really familiar. See, for the longest time, Gnosticism seemed to be dead. But all of a sudden, it creeps back. Always there, always in the background. And now it's back, triumphantly, and has single-handedly accosted the view of Christ, even from Christians. Christians, they don't know who Christ is. They don't know who the real Christ is. And you know what's more? They don't think it matters. What's up with that? I'll tell you what's up with that. John knew that it mattered. And that is the philosophical setting that this book was written in. Now remember, this is John, okay? This is the same John who wrote Revelation. What was John concerned about in Revelation? What did he see coming? He saw coming apostasy. What did I say apostasy was? Apostasy is when you take the truth and you flip it on its head and you replace it with something else. You say, this is true, but in reality, you're giving the exact opposite. I called that earlier today an inverted hermeneutic, and it is Gnosticism. There is this really crazy website, I can't remember the address of it, but you go to it, and it's this cartoon of Christ, and he's on the cross, which itself, could be positive or negative. But then, after a couple seconds, when you roll the mouse over it, it splits open, and a snake is inside of him. This is Gnosticism, okay? It's pretty jacked up. So, let's talk about what John was saying about Christ. Understanding the philosophical world that he was existing in, understanding what was coming, being concerned about what was coming in the future, understanding who Christ was, because you remember, to John, this is not some Joe Schmo. This is not even just God to John. Imagine this. Christ is God to us, okay? Christ was a great man to us. Christ to me is the most funny, most clever person that ever existed as a historical figure. But that's not who he is to John. I'm sure that it's true to John. John says at the end of the book of John that if, what did he say? He said that it would be impossible to write, there would not be enough time in the world to write all the stories that could be said about him. That's what John says at the end of John. I mean, John had a big idea of who Christ was, okay? But it's way different than even ours. Like, we may have the most intimate connection with Christ, but John's connection with him had a physical memory, okay? He touched him. He laid his head on his bosom, like the way that Colin does to people. He was that close to Christ. So understand, we can't even begin to process the depth of experience that John must be coming from. But what we can do is we can appreciate it. We can respect it. It's more than a historical document. It's more than a theological treatise. In the beginning was the Word. That is not who John is. It's not what John was saying. He was saying, in the beginning was my best friend. You understand that? It's so much bigger than the way that we give credence to it. But let's go back. Let's try to be respectful of it, okay? John 1 through 5. In the beginning, the Word already existed. Very, very important. A lot of translations say, in the beginning was the Word. Inarche ino logos. That's the Greek for it. Inarche, the term inarche does not mean beginning. It means before the beginning. So, in the beginning, the Word already existed. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He existed in the beginning with God. God created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. I've already said this, in my mind, is one of the most powerful trees in Scripture. It's one of my favorites. It's hugely philosophical. So there's a couple of points about this. One, this is a creation story. Okay? Now, a lot of people take this to mean that this is about the creation of man. But it's not. This is not at all about the creation of man. This is about creation from God's perspective. Okay? For man, we start with physical matter. For man, in the beginning, basically there was nothing. And the earth was void. And the earth was without form. And then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And it was good. But for John, it says, "In the beginning was the Word." What's it talking about? When it says the word, logos, that is the Greek for the word. What does that mean? Let's examine creation. How does creation happen in Genesis? God spoke. So, in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was God, and the Word was with God. And the Word was with God before everything existed. Yet, in the beginning, God spoke. And that's how physical matter was born. I would submit to you that Christ is more than physical matter. I would submit to you that John's understanding of Christ is predicated on the idea that Christ is more than physical matter. Because the word logos does not necessarily mean word. See, in English, when we think word, we think printed word. Or we think read word, like the word that you read. Okay? But that's not what logos means. Logos means spoken word. It means active word. It means word as something that is alive, the same way that we might use the term imagination. Okay? So, though I'm not going to say they're concisely the same thing, it might be appropriate to say, in the beginning was God's imagination, God's consciousness, God's self-dialogue. And the Word was God. Because guess what? I am my own consciousness. Am I not? Descartes said what? What did Descartes say, guys? I think, therefore I am. I know that I am alive because I know that I'm alive. The fact that I can process, the fact that I can think, the fact that I can have self-dialogue indicates to me the existence of myself. I think, therefore I am. I don't know about the rest of you. You may all be a dream, okay? But I know that I'm alive because I have self-dialogue. I think, therefore I am. In the same vein, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God. And the Word was with God. So, you have God, and you have this thing that is the same thing as God, but it's also capable of being with God at the same time. How does that work? Well, I would go once again to the concept of self-dialogue. Have you ever had a conversation with yourself? Everybody? Everybody know what that's like to have a conversation with yourself? Are you not yourself when you're having that conversation? You're yourself, right? You know what the other person's going to say, right? But are you still separate and unique in your viewpoints? Yes, because you're dynamic as individuals. Well, the Bible says that in the beginning, as God existed, He was also dynamic as an individual, capable of having self-dialogue. And that self-dialogue was not just synonymous with him, a drop of honey in an ocean, as Gnosticism would put it, but in fact was completely separate from him at the same time. And it was with him. Now, that in itself is 2 verses. Think about the depth of those verses. What do you have as a first cause there? The Word. What you don't have as a first cause is what? Light. So already, in 2 verses, John has made an incredible philosophical statement that has multiple ramifications, that gives us, for instance, the concept of Trinitarian doctrine. Okay? We believe in God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. In these 2 verses, we have found John explain that belief already. 2 verses. But then John goes on. And he says, God created everything through him, Logos. God created everything through the Logos. And nothing was created except through him. Think about that statement. We know that God spoke and everything was created. So what is being said? What's being said about Genesis? Come on, guys. Put it together. Genesis said, God said, let there be light. What could also be said? Yeah. What could also be said was that God spoke Christ and there was light. Think about it. God spoke Christ and then there was light. Is that substantiated? We're about to find out. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. That's verse 4. But let's step back again into verse 3, just so I hit those points. God created everything through him, and nothing was created except through him. We have an interesting term here, created. Why is that term interesting in reference to Gnosticism? Yeah. See, what John has done is he's said that Christ is the physical creator. He's associated him with what Gnostics say is evil. Why? So they can't use him that way. Through him, everything was created. What does that also say about Christ? Huh? What? Yeah, first cause. It puts Christ as first cause. It associates him with the divine. Okay? So now, not only has he basically made it so that creation is not evil, but he's also said that Christ is not an emanation of God, meaning a step down from God, but he's the same as God. Because God created everything, and that's already been established. And notice that it doesn't say, in the beginning, God created the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, or the Word became God. It doesn't say that. It says, in the beginning was the Word. Just like, from the moment of your existence, you have an inner voice. Okay? There is no creation of your inner voice. It's who you are. It was from the beginning. In an infinite God, if we believe that he is God, he has to be bigger than us. That makes him immortal. That makes him infinite. Then that means that that voice that is God, that's always talking with God, is also infinite. Meaning that he is God. But he's also not at the same time. Or perhaps it would be better to say separate at the same time. The Word gave life to everything that was created, and his life brought light to everyone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. Or as Beth read earlier, cannot comprehend it. one of my favorite passages. I talked about it last week. Talked about how light doesn't cease to exist. It's still there. Remember that? Because it cannot be extinguished. Or as they say in science, it cannot be absorbed without limit. Pretty cool, I think. Anyway, so the light shines in the darkness can never extinguish it. In order for the Word to exist, in order for the light to exist, there had to have been the Word. That is the first premise here. It's the first thing that John starts off by saying. Now remember, to John, the Word is not the historical figure of Christ. The Word is Christ, my buddy. Okay? The Word is Christ, the one that I'd go to the bar with. The Word is Christ, the one that I would lay my head on. This is very, very important to us. It's a big statement. Can you imagine making that statement about even your best friend? It's pretty heavy. Okay. So God sent a man, John the Baptist, to tell about the light so that everyone might believe because of his testimony. John himself was not the light. He was simply a witness to tell about the light. The one who is the true light, who gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He came into the very world that he created, but the world didn't recognize him. He came to his own people, and even they rejected him. But to all who believed him and accepted him, he gave the right to become children of God. So the Word became human and made his home among us. He was full of unfailing love and faithfulness, and we have seen his glory, the glory of the Father's one and only Son. John, verse 6 through 14, is talking about God's passion for humanity and man's reaction. What's man's reaction? Rejection. Think about that. Why? What do we know about darkness? Darkness cannot comprehend the light. It cannot extinguish the light, and it cannot comprehend it. And they wouldn't comprehend it. Even the disciples wouldn't comprehend it until he was dead, until his blood had been shed. What did I allude to last week? Right? Right. I made a point last week that there is a possible color lexicon here. But there's an interesting concept that blood had to be shed for them to understand. They didn't understand he was God. Not even the people who were with him day in and day out for 3 years. Not even the people, not even the person who wrote this understood that he was God. His best friend, doing all these crazy miracles, didn't understand he was God because they could not comprehend it. Because they were in what? Darkness. It's important to note, humanity is in darkness. Humanity doesn't understand God because they're in darkness. So, in 6 through 14, we find that God's passion for humanity and man's reaction is dramatic. We find the whole gospel story summed up there. That God loved man so much that he became a human, man rejected him, and God still loved him. With that said, what is it that he does? What is it that he goes a step further to do? Before that, what? Jesus. What is it that Jesus goes a step further to do? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. We picture this. It's esoteric, right? I don't know about the rest of you, but when I say in the beginning was the Word, immediately what I think about is space. How about you guys? Do you think there was a planet, and you think in the beginning was the Word, and in your mind's eye you have Eden? Is that how you guys think, or do you think there was a void? Is that where you go? Nothing, right? Blankness. And then, like a Fritz Freeling cartoon, like Bugs Bunny, all of a sudden, like, things appear, like elements appear, like as you're talking. In the beginning was the Word. All of a sudden, boom, the Word. And the Word was God. And then somehow you illustrate that, right? So when you picture Christ popping up as the Word, which I've established that he is he wearing like a spacesuit or something so he can breathe in the void? So you picture actually the Word. Okay, so now that we've refracted the thinking and we've inserted Christ, is he wearing a spacesuit so that he can breathe in the void? No, or he shouldn't be. Why? How about this? Because at his base, he's not mortal. Because God did something else. He made himself into a human being. You see? So when we say in the beginning was the Word, we don't mean that the physical Jesus Christ popped into existence with a space helmet on that has little, antenna. Okay? What we mean is that the essence of Christ, the personhood of Christ, the consciousness of Christ existed pre-manifestation. So what did he do besides creating everything and making himself the light of all things? What else did he do? He made himself human. He manifested himself in a way that we could digest. Now I want you to consider this. Okay. Have you ever seen Fat Man in Little Coat? You know what I'm talking about, Kevin? Chris Farley, SNL skit. He takes this little tiny coat and he puts it on and he's, stretching and so on and so forth, right, to put it on. Humanity is frail. Humanity is mortal. Humanity is tiny. What is God? He's infinite, okay? If Chris Farley is Fat Man and is playing God in this, then Chris Farley would have to be much more bigger than that. Humanity is a tiny, tiny, tiny coat. In order for Christ to do this, to become human, he would have had to do what? Limit himself. Now, what's really interesting about that is that, what did I say about light? Light cannot be absorbed without limit. Now think about that. Light cannot be absorbed without limit. And yet, a limitless being is capable of absorbing light with limit. He purposed himself to make it so that his skin, his body, his blood would be capable of making it so that we could see God. I would suggest to you that though Abraham, for instance, was able to come to faith without Christ, which is well documented, there's something so much more genuine about faith through Christ. John understood in post, but he understood that this man that he was with was not just a man. He understood that this man that he had spent 3 years of his life with, that he had watched his friends die for, the man whose mother he was taking care of, that this man purposefully limited the whole power of the limitless universe within himself so that he could be friends with John. Think about that. Not so that he could die for John, so that John would be saved. Not so that he could shed his blood and fulfill some prophecy. Because Christ is not the historical academic Christ as he is to us, but so that he could be friends with John. How do I justify that aspect of God's want? How do I really say, okay, well, God really just wants to be friends with us? Our faith in God is supposed to create friendship. It sounds very kumbaya and singing around a campfire. How do I justify that that's really what God wants? That he doesn't really want sacrifices and so on and so forth. How do I justify that? How do I justify that God becomes a man and tortures himself to the point of death, allows things to happen to him that even on our best days in our life, we hope do not ever happen to us, because there's a good chance that we won't make it through it? For friendship. How do I justify that? Here's how I justify it. Abraham. Remember I said that there was something special about going through Christ and that Abraham didn't have to do that? What was the ultimate thing that God and Abraham had in connection to each other? Friendship. Did you know that Abraham is called the friend of God? He's not called my servant Abraham. He's called God's friend. The heart of David. God calls David a man after my own heart. Remember, David is a scoundrel. Clearly, God does not have the heart of a scoundrel. But what he does have is the want for contrition and reconciliation and relationship. And David, for all of his struggle, for all of the things that he did that was sacrificially wrong, or that would have made sacrosanct and blasphemousness in the temple, for all the things that he did that was terrible, sending people off to die and committing adultery and all of these terrible things, that he was just a terrible person, he just wanted a relationship with God. What was the song that we sang? Create in me a clean heart. No? Cast me not away from your presence, O Lord. Take not your spirit from me. Restore unto me the joy of salvation. Think about that. When we as Christians, especially when we bring it to non-believers, but when we as Christians talk about salvation, we don't think about it as joyous. We think about heaven as joyous. We have been taught to believe that the point of Christianity is about attaining something, is about the product of heaven. What did David want that made him a man after God's own heart? Joy. Joy in salvation. Joy in reconciliation. It wasn't about him attaining heaven. Because to the Jews, again, they didn't believe in the concept of separation from God. You see, David was stuck with God. This was his, best friend. Now think about John. This was his best friend. Now what did God want from John? He wanted him to take care of his mom when he was gone. Think about the simplicity of that statement. Think about the simplicity of his dying words to John. It wasn't, now John, I'm about to die. Make sure that you do this, 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 and this. I want to make sure that my kingdom is developed this way, so here's a handbook. I want to make sure that everybody knows, that this is how it's got to be. I want to make sure that this person's in charge and that person's in charge and so on and so forth. No, not at all. What was John's last request from Christ? Take care of my mom, dude. I'm toast. That's the statement of a friend. Now when we look at David, That's the statement of a friend. I want joy in our relationship. I'm stuck with you. Think about that in marriage. Think about that in marriage. Marriage is not always, butterflies and cotton candy, right? It's not. We take the oaths thinking that we're stuck with that person. And sometimes being stuck with that person is terrible. Sometimes that person loves you, but doesn't like you. Okay? What is it that David wants in his sin, in his full capacity as a human being to sin? He wants God to like him. And he wants to like God. He wants joy in salvation. Go back to John. What was the message? The message was, you are not a disparity. You are not an accident like they want you to believe. You are not an accident that was created by the emanation of some divine source that is so far away from you that it didn't want to have a relationship with you. God is not something that was created because that emanation wanted to have a relationship with God and it rejected her, and so then God was created. That's not at all true. The reality of it is that relationship has always been there from the beginning, because in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was a conversation. Think about that. The Word was an active presence, an imagination that was infinite. In other words, John is saying, in the beginning was relationship. And what did that relationship do? It created more relationship. And then what did it do? It created people. It created people to have relationship with. But those people were dark. Those people were troubled. Those people didn't understand how to have relationship because it was too much. So what did it do? It took and it limited light. It absorbed the light and it limited it so that it could have a relationship with humankind. So that God could be what? Friends with us. Friends. That's what John's saying. Because to John, the fact that Christ was born of a virgin, it's pretty sweet, dude. Right? This is his best friend. Dude, you were born of a virgin. But that doesn't really matter. What matters is that these people were tarnishing his best friend. What matters is that these people were obstructing the method that his best friend gave his life for. That all of his best friends who were out there had given their lives for. And he watched them die one by one over time. And he watched them be persecuted. And so you know what? I'm not going to talk about that thing. That's cool. But I'm not going to talk about it. What I'm going to talk about is the truth. In the beginning was Christ. And he was the method by which everything was created. And even though your world is dark, he's the light. And he took that upon himself to bring to you the possibility of friendship. A friendship which I know intimately as being his best friend. Think about that. That's a much, much more impactful truth than saying, a long time ago, in a village far, far away, there was a pregnant woman who got impregnated by immaculate conception. I mean, that's cool. It's neat. It's kind of scary. But it doesn't even begin to touch us. You have to ask yourself the question as you look around. What story are we falling for? You know, you watch Transformers, for instance. Another Gnostic movie. spark of life, the all spark. About it. You watch Transformers, for instance. You watch The Matrix. You watch Pleasantville. You see all of these things, and you're like, yeah, that's true. We are like, what if we are trapped? And you know what? It's true. We are trapped. But it's not because we're a mistake. And I think that that's really what John's getting at. I think that that's really the main point. Because humanity, there's just something about us, productivity, value, relationship, those things that we crave. I know that I am a terrible, terrible person deep down. I know that there are things in my life when nobody's looking there are things that when nobody has looked that I've done that I would rather have not done, Like I was saying the other day, I know that I'm a monster. And I know more intimately than anybody else what type of monster and just how terrible I'm capable of being. But I also know that I'm not a mistake. I also know that I am powerful. That I may be a completely emaciated, just torn up, destroyed, majestic creature, but I'm still that majestic creature. I may be a terrible excuse for humankind, but I'm still a man. And that means something. What John was saying is that it does mean something. What John was saying was that it meant so much of something that God himself made sure, even though he didn't have to, that we would be able to have the same experience that John himself had. And ultimately, I don't think we really get that when we read, for instance, the book of John. Ultimately, I think we think it would be nice, or that it will be nice, to be saved by Christ. To have this security of salvation. We think that's the point of Christianity, is being saved. But it's not really. As John writes his gospel, what he's trying to accomplish is giving us the security of knowing that one day I get to lay my head on Christ's bosom. Or that if I were around back then, Christ would ask me to take care of his mother. And I think that puts a really different spin on how we have a tendency to look at Christ. So, I would just ask you, as you look around, to ask yourself the question, what are you falling for? Are you saying, yeah, I do have this spark inside me, but, I was just an accident. So, yeah. Because that's what the world's falling for. And that's what we say. I mean, that's what we teach in schools. Philosophically, it sounds ridiculous to say, from the pulpit or whatever, that this is what people believe. But think about it. I mean, we're taught that time plus chance equals life. We're taught that we're nothing more than a cosmic chance, a mistake of the universe. So much so that, there's nothing like us out there because of that fact. Why would we let that be? I don't know. That just really bugs me. I don't think that we should let that be. I don't think as Christians we should operate that way either. As Christians, We should operate on the knowledge that God, that Christ, that the same person who, as a dying wish, just wanted someone to take care of his mom, was at the beginning of all things. You know? That he created everything. This is that person, John's best friend. And he created everything that existed. And he created us with all of our potentials, with all of our frailties. And that wasn't a mistake. It was purposeful. And if we allow him to be our light, if we allow ourselves to glow in his bioluminescence, like what I talked about last week, if we allow ourselves to understand it that way, instead of to think that the spark that I have is just a mistake that constantly shows me my imperfections, because I'm really a mistake, so that spark doesn't actually mean anything. It just means that I'm on fire, and therefore I'm burning. I think that our lives will mean so much more, even as Christians. Even as Christians, I think it's lost on us. So, I think that's about it. We're going to do communion now.